Justin from Long Island, New York. I recently learned from a friend of mine who is a wrestler what the definition of a receipt is in wrestling. And I recall you talking about that term with something involving Chris Jericho and Shane McMahon, although I don't remember the context. My question is, what would you say was the best receipt given in wrestling? So what he means by a receipt is, I guess your friend already told you, but basically what he means is, if someone takes liberties with another wrestler in a match, or not even liberties, let's say, for example, they tag him with a stiff shot. Maybe they didn't mean to do it. Maybe they did. That person may be due for a receipt at some point. I liken it to a pitcher in baseball drilling the opposing batter with the ball, and the other team thinks it was intentional. You can best believe there's going to be a receipt. It might not be that day. It might not be the next day. It might not even be until next season. But it's coming at some point. The Jericho thing was at Survivor Series one year. Shane kept tagging him in the face. And finally, Jericho, he just booted him down. He went to the top rope. He came off. He kicked him right in the face. And then he yelled at him to calm the fuck down. Sometimes that's the only way to get your message across. Right? There was no reason for Shane, who at that point had more than enough matches under his belt, to still be throwing those awful punches and hurting people. But there's been some famous ones. The Royal Rumble triple threat where Braun Strowman got a little too excited in there and he kneed Brock Lesnar in the head. Of all the people to knee in the head, Brock came back and clubbed him with a right-hand shot right to the side of the head. Stevie Richards. That brutal chair shot to the head with JBL, that was a receipt for what JBL did to the Blue Meanie at One Night Stand. But the one that stands out to me, and it's probably my favorite, was Vader and Ken Shamrock. Now, Shamrock denies that this was a receipt, although I think he later said that it could have been, and he just didn't think it was. Vader never said anything to him about it, when they got to the back. But Shamrock's first match in the WWF was against Vader. And Shamrock had done pro wrestling before. He was actually a wrestler before he ever fought in the UFC. And I've told that story about, in his early days, how he almost got killed by the Nasty Boys. But he was a fighter, and, he could lay his shots in, certainly. So could Vader, which is why it's pretty precious that Vader had to tell him during their match to ease up. Imagine Vader, of all people, telling someone not to be so stiff. But Shamrock didn't hear him, and so later in the match, he tagged Vader in the face with a knee that almost broke his nose. Vader gets up, and he absolutely blasts this man in the ear with a forearm shot that spun him around. I could still hear the sound that it made, so that's probably my favorite. Ryan from Fort Worth, Texas. Longtime listener of 10 plus years and would love to hear your take on this. Complaining about a lack of story in a pro wrestling match is nothing new, but ever since Cody Rhodes came back to WWE and introduced finishing the story, it's all I hear fans complain about. I am of the opinion that established characters are more important than typical pro wrestling storylines that are usually unnecessarily drawn out and littered with gaps in logic. I'm not saying stories are not important, I'm simply saying that for the most part, they're not compelling enough for me to be overly worried about if I know a match with certain participants will deliver. For example, Maxine Dupree needs a story. Cody post-Mania defending his title against someone like Logan Paul, not so much. What say you? I'm actually going to take that Logan Paul example and throw it right back at you as an example of exactly why Cody needs his story. I don't care to see these random title matches that are thrown out there for no reason. There was still no good reason for Nick Aldis to anoint Logan Paul as the number one contender to the WWE title. Other than the fact that they needed a challenger, and for whatever reason, maybe the Saudis, they wanted Logan Paul on that show, and that's why Logan Paul was on that show. And now they're getting back to the AJ Styles story. Feels kind of odd, doesn't it, how the Logan Paul thing was just sort of randomly inserted in there when they could have done match number 2. With Cody and AJ on that show. It's clear that they wanted him on that show for a specific reason. So I would take that example you gave there and use that as an example of why story is so important. There are exceptions to the rule. Yes, you can do matches sometimes when there's no long, drawn-out story, but nobody is saying every story needs to be long and drawn out. You know, the Cody Rhodes thing was 2 years in the making. You don't need 2 years or even a full year to tell a great story. You know, you don't. Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man was a story that played out over a year and a half, and that was a great story. Sting and Hogan was a great story until we got the payoff, and then it wasn't so great anymore. Right? Those are examples of long-term booking, long-term stories. But you can have a fun story that plays out over the course of 3 or 4 months. Look at Randy Orton and Christian in the spring and summer of 2011. That came out of nowhere. Right? That wasn't a year-long feud. But that's one of the more fun, feuds and stories that played out that entire year in 2011. Story is very important. Characters are important as well. You say characters. Again, it's important to note that we're not talking about, like gimmicks. Not everybody is going to have some wacky gimmick. I think it's important to have characters on TV that people can invest in. They either really, really hate this person and want to see them lose in the worst way, or they really like this guy, or they really like this woman, whatever it is about them, and they are willing to tune into their segments, buy their merch, maybe even buy a ticket to see them when they come to town for a live event, or a TV. That's also very important. I can't sit here and tell you that one is more important than the other. I think they're equally important. And if you could find the right mix of both, then you've hit the jackpot. You could find 2 characters that people like or they think they're cool, and you have a great story or a great feud to build up. That's a money program right there. That's what every wrestling promoter should strive for, right? It's a lot harder than it sounds, but yet in some cases, it's not as hard as sometimes I feel like they make it out to be. I feel like maybe sometimes they don't put in the effort that they should be. But I think they're equally important. Again, it's hard for me to rank one over the other, but if I had to, if you told me, hey, you got to pick one or the other, I still, it's hard because I want to say character. I immediately thought of Daniel Bryan. And then I think of what they did with Daniel Bryan, and that was a story. It wasn't just the character of Daniel Bryan, the underdog who got screwed over by the Authority. The story was him working his way back to the title that was taken from him. That was the story. So that's why I say they're on equal footing for me. I think they're both equally important. Dominic from Connecticut. Buy, sell, or rent. The most insufferable 3-year stretch for WWE television. 1993 to 1995. 2009 to 2011. 2017 to 2019. 2017 to 2019. I'm going to put that at the top of my list. Number 2 is a little bit harder. I'm inclined to put 93 to 95 at number 2. But that's more so for 95. I know business was not great for them. Business wasn't great for anybody in 93 and 94. I look back fondly on that period, though. I could easily go back and watch stuff from that 93, 94 period. I have absolutely no interest in going back and watching most stuff from 2017 to 2019. And Raw in particular during that period was as bad as it has ever been. Even worse than 95. At least in 95, Raw was, an hour. It was 46 minutes with commercials. And it wasn't 3 hours long every week. So that's an easy number 1. Number 2, most insufferable. I would say, oh man, put me on the spot here, huh? I'm going to go 2009 to 2011. And then I'm going to put 93 and 95 at the bottom.